Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the early bird special of the TechBridge Youth Entrepreneurship Conference. So the early bird special is something that we started back during COVID. My name's Don Webster, and I'm the executive director. I hope you have a great day today. I'm really looking forward to the speakers. And our first speaker, please let me introduce him. Mike Burns is a recognized leader in applied artificial intelligence for enterprise use cases. As founder and CEO of ATTAiNABLE Edge, he helps large businesses improve their performance by applying generative AI solutions to help automate the routine and make smarter, better, and faster decisions enabled by AI. Mike is also the former Chief Information Officer of Benco Dental, a $1 billion dental products distributor. Is that national or international? National, 1 billion with a B, where he was responsible for technology across the enterprise. Beyond his professional endeavors, Mike is deeply involved in community service as the board chair for Maternal and Family Health Services, a not-for-profit catering to over 400,000 individuals in 14 Pennsylvania counties. Mike, thank you for that. Mike holds a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science from King's College, so he's an alum, and an MBA from the University of Scranton. Mike resides in Shavertown, PA, with his wife and son. Mike is a good friend. Please welcome Mike Burns.
Thanks so much. All right. Good to see everybody here this morning. Good to be back at the alma mater. So we're going to have some fun this morning. All right. This is a three-part story. And I've been told I have to stand right at the podium and not wiggle too much for the video, so that's going to be hard for me. So, all right. But we have a three-part story here. One, when you're out talking about AI, you hear a lot about that it's hype, it's being overhyped, all those kinds of things. I'm here to tell you that's not true. It's real, it's happening today, it's accelerating and getting more powerful. And three, there's a massive amount of opportunity for those of us who are prepared. So when I say AI, what do I mean by that? At the highest level, artificial intelligence is any tool that can replace work that used to require human intelligence, right? That could be anything. And so I've broken down categories here. Machine learning are those kinds of code that we can teach the computer to get better. And then we've got deep learning, where we're actually using neural networks that sort of emulate how the brain works a little bit. Within that, we have generative AI, which can generate new content from pictures to music to text. And what we're going to talk about here today is what I call general purpose AI. These are a subset of generative AI that are really general purpose, applicable to many problems. And they have some really interesting scaling properties that are going to change the future. So there are only really 4 companies in the world producing cutting-edge frontier models. I have them up there. These companies are spending billions to develop the technology. This is not the kind of thing that most of us are going to have the opportunity to work on building. But we can leverage it and we can use it, and it's changing the world. All right, so we need to explain the basics a little bit before I tell you why I'm so excited about what's happening in the world here. So everything we're talking about is under this category of deep learning, and they have neural networks. What does that mean? Well, if you think about how our own brains work, right, there are neurons connected to each other, and we don't really know the details of how it works, but hey, I'm sitting here talking to you today, so it's doing something pretty cool, right? So these neural networks are really based on the same concept, where there are artificial neurons connected to each other in layers, and they make interesting things happen. So Google did some really interesting research that when you build these large language models based on neural networks, when they get to around 8 billion parameters, and parameters, by the way, is just counting up the lines between the neurons. So when you hear people talking about AI models, that's what we're talking about, is how many connections are there inside the network. Interesting things start to emerge. It can start answering questions. It can start understanding language. And then as they get bigger, at 62 billion parameters, they can start translating languages, French to English. We're doing that for a client right now. They can start writing software, doing code. Right? At 540 billion parameters, which just to give you some context, this is the size of GPT-3, which is 3 years old. That's how many parameters GPT-3 had. At that level, it's telling jokes, it can have a dialogue, it can do Q&A about physics. I want to be very clear, none of these capabilities were trained. All these large language models are trained on is predicting the next token. You give it a bunch of language, it predicts the next word, for lack of a, not going to go into the technical, right? Everything else we're talking is emergent behavior. It was never trained to tell jokes, right? It was never trained to know the answers to physics problems. That was 3 years ago. Where are we at today? The cutting edge model that exists today is GPT-4 by OpenAI, right? Nobody knows exactly how many parameters. It's proprietary. The estimate is around 1 trillion. What does 1 trillion parameters get you? It has a 1410 SAT score. I am not embarrassed to tell you that is higher than the SAT score I got in high school. That correlates to 124 IQ. If you're familiar with IQ, the average human has an IQ of 100. So it is at some form of factual reasoning better at those assessments than the average person. So, I specialize in applied AI. What does that mean? How do we use this? If you look on the right of this slide, you'll see applications. These are, I know we have some high school students in the audience. Look at all the AP exams on there. GPT-4 can get a better grade on most of the high school AP exams than the average test taker. That's the level of application to being able to do real things. Also of interest on there is the bar exam. To become a lawyer in the US, it passes the bar exam with a better grade than the average test taker, so pretty interesting capabilities already. But no tool is perfect. There are limitations that we have to be aware of as we work on this stuff, right? So just go through them real quick. So when you work on this stuff, they only have knowledge to a point in time. Even the best model is only updated till April of 2023. You ask it about what's going on currently, current events, no idea. They are limited into the context of what they can talk about. You and I remember things that happened in our childhood years, right? I can tell you things that happened when I was in elementary school. The working memory for the largest models is about the size of a single textbook. So they just can't keep a lot of stuff sort of in memory to work on it at the same time, which is a big limitation when you work with them. They can't change the world. They can't affect the world right now. We're going to talk about this more in a second, but they're really good at answering questions and generally have limited capability to affect things outside of their scope. They can't schedule a meeting. They can't place a phone call, right? And this slide is getting harder and harder to do. Before I go into that, the one thing I wanted to call out is when folks talk about the limitations and risks of AI, bias is a big part of that. So I'm not going to get into AI safety too deeply today, but I do want to call out for anyone looking at this, there are biases in these models. They're trained on the public internet. We all know there's bad stuff on the internet, so bias is in, bias is out. When you work with these tools, you have to be cognizant and careful that you're not perpetuating those biases. I will say one fun thing, as I was putting this presentation for all of you together today, this picture here of these gears, I gave a similar presentation to a group of CEOs a couple months ago, and I used that as an example of what current frontier models were incapable of doing, right? So it's called fluid intelligence. As this gear turns, follow the pattern, which direction is this gear going to turn? Turns out with the latest multimodal versions of GPT-4, it can solve that problem. And as I was preparing the slide deck, I got the answer wrong. I'm like, it still has a limitation. And then I double checked my work and it was right and I was wrong. So there are definitely limitations involved. All right, so where do we go from here? It's important to understand how we got here. When I was at King's, we were doing software 1.0. I was learning to write software by hand, right? We're now firmly into software 2.0, where software is taught, right? That's an important distinction. It's an important way of thinking about the world. All of the technologies we're talking about here today, these general purpose large language models, all started with GPT-3. That was in 2020, so only 3 years ago. So we've seen a tremendous amount of progress very quickly. And just this year, we have actually left sort of the narrow AI and we're now into multimodal. GPT-4 can handle photos, images, sound, right? We're entering agency. We're starting to give these AI tools the ability to make an impact on the world outside of them. That's very much what our company does for companies, is give the AI agency to do things within their enterprises. And so where are we going from here? ... right? There's this concept of artificial and general intelligence. That's sort of a buzzword in the industry. It means when we get to the point where AI can do generally everything people can do better than us. We are not there right now. We may never get there. I want to be very clear about that. No one knows. There are predictions either way, but it's so much of a murky area, I don't think it's even worth thinking about. So from my perspective, we are nowhere near artificial general intelligence. But there's a lot of money going into this industry to get us there quickly. So $16 billion just this year in investments to move these frontier models forward. This is where it starts getting really interesting. I want you to draw your own conclusions on where this is going. So this is a research paper by Google, specifically that shows the idea of the scaling law. So what's starting to happen is we are starting to develop a theory of intelligence the same way we have a theory of gravity, right? And there's this concept where if you have these neural networks and you spend more time training them, more iterations, they get smarter. Or I can make the brain, the neural network, bigger and get smarter. Or I can put new data in that the model hasn't seen before. It gets smarter. All three of those are just a factor of money. The more money I put in, I can get more data, more training cycles, or a more complex network. All three of those improve the intelligence. There is no theoretical limit to how high that gets. 3 years ago, GPT-3 cost 10 million, GPT-4 cost 100 million. The models being developed now are $1 billion plus each. So as of September of this year, we talked about these models were able to get past the SAT, the GREs, the bar exam. As more and more money goes in, there is no known theoretical limit to their upper performance, right? This is why this is a real game changer. The other thing is you have to think about adoption. It's one thing if this amazing technology is out here and it's sort of being ignored and put to the side. That's very much not the case here. If you look at this graph of technology adoption, it took almost 50 years for a quarter of the world population to get access to electricity when it was invented. It took 1 month for a quarter of the human population to get access to large language models, right? So not only is the capability progressing remarkably fast, its adoption is getting out there too. Let's see here. So what's that mean for us? What's coming? What's it mean for all of you in the audience? What do you do about it? My crystal ball does kind of suck, so take everything you're going to see with a grain of salt, but we'll go through it together. The first thing to remind you of is this is all brand new. This is a baby we're talking about, right? Like our iPhones have been around for 10 years plus now at this point. This is really still in the cradle, and it's developing very quickly. But this is one of the most, I think, interesting slides on here. So if you look at this chart on the right, this is recent analysis by McKinsey. If you're not familiar with McKinsey, they're one of the world's leading management consultancies. They do a lot of research. And the point of this slide is to look at the tasks that can be done by a person versus an AI. Because one of the things we talk about is we never automate jobs, right? We automate tasks, and that's what applied AI is all about. And the amount of tasks that are becoming automatable is remarkable. So as you look over here, we have sort of pre-generative AI and post-generative AI. The dotted lines are the pre-generative AI. You'll notice that what's happened in the last year, a lot of these predictions were out that AI wouldn't catch up to people until 2040, 2050. We had 30 or 40 years until capabilities got there. Look at the solid lines. In many areas, creativity, logical reasoning, natural language generation, sensory perception, they're as good or better than the top percentile, the top quartile of people today, and the rest of them are predicted to get there by the mid-2030s. That's 10 years from now, right? So this is a remarkable progression where we've just taken 50 years, 50 years, off the forecast of how long this capability would take to deliver. Okay, so what's that mean? Well, think about the change to jobs that comes out of that. Education, both as a student, using these as tools to learn, and as an educator, preparing customized, individualized curriculum for your students. Think about medicine. You know, Don mentioned I worked for Benco Dental. 2 years ago, we started selling AI-enabled software to dentists that would read the x-rays and give diagnoses back to the dentist because the AI was better at reading the x-rays than the human clinicians. That was 2 years ago, right? So these are the kinds of impacts we're seeing into these fields. It's hard for me to identify an area of business that isn't being impacted by these. As we come in and talk to clients, our biggest challenge is focus because there are so many opportunities. People want us to help with everything, and we need to really narrow that down. But from data analysis to software development. I was talking with some folks in the lobby before we came in. I just want to check my time too. I was talking with folks in the lobby. Coding as we know it is not going to be a thing in 5 years. And I say that as somebody who's grown up as a software developer. It really becomes about expressing the problems, knowing what good looks like, and having an assistant that writes the code for you. That's already happening today. All right. So another interesting trend that happens here is you, me, everyone in this room, we cost a little bit more every year, right? Inflation goes up, cost of living goes up. The costs of AI are connected to the costs of compute cycles. And for those of you who have never heard of it, there's a law in IT called Moore's Law, which says that every 18 months, think of it, the cost of a transistor gets cut in half, which makes computers cheaper. That's why our computers cost so much less today than they did 20 years ago. There's a direct correlation between that and the cost of AI. The costs of AI processing are falling approximately 90% per year, every year right now. So you're getting into an interesting divide where the cost of human labor get a little bit more expensive every year. The costs of artificial intelligence get dramatically cheaper every year. And so you can sort of see where those trend lines go in terms of the workforce and opportunities in business. And right now, there's a lot of work being done to expand the capabilities of these tools. We talked about the fact that right now they're called large language models. That's the transformer architecture that we're using. ATTAiNABLE Edge, my company with my partner Alan in the back, we focus almost exclusively in the left column of this slide, which is integrating text-based AI into businesses, right? From generating sales leads to companies, for automatically responding to customer service emails without a person having to see them. These are all text-based work that we can automate with AI, but this is just the very, very beginning. So the way I built this slide, it takes a little bit of an explanation, is across the top is whether we have training data available. Have folks started training the models and spending the compute budget to get the model trained? Have we invented the right user interfaces? And are there folks out there integrating this into business processes? A couple things here I'd say is, the user interfaces matter a lot more than you would think. ChatGPT, right, only came out last year. That was the same technology, exact same technology, GPT-3, that came out 3 years ago. No one was excited about GPT-3 other than geeks. Everyone in the world was excited over ChatGPT, and the only difference was an interface, right? A chat interface to talk to the AI model. So these matter a lot. What's happening right now is in images and audio. Technically, the capabilities are amazing. But folks are not yet quite integrating that into business processes. There's a lot of opportunity there. When you get into video and financial data, the training is happening. Has anyone, raise your hand if you're using like ChatGPT in your own life. So about, less than I expected, about half the room. Generally pretty impressive, right? If you look at AI-generated video, it looks like something out of like a horror show right now. Like they do not come out good. And that's because the training is still happening. We'll get there eventually. But if you remember back to what I said, where the capabilities of these tools get better the more data you put in, one of the things you'll hear sometimes is people say, yeah, but they're already trained on the internet. What more training data can you give them? Well, think of how much data is in geospatial imaging from all the satellites in orbit, right? Real-time video even of the Earth. Or the entire databases of human genetics and proteins. These are things just at the beginning. And robotics, you might be wondering, why does he have that up there? We have robotics all over northeastern PA and warehouses everywhere, right? How is that on the cutting edge? Traditional robot, you have to go back to that first slide. Software 1.0 versus 2.0. The robotics that are generally being used right now are programmed, right? They're discrete program for a process. We're getting into the point of building data sets for robotics, physical robotics, to learn how processes work and autonomously operate. So if you're interested in this concept, take a picture of this slide. I didn't want to risk the internet working. It's about an 8-minute video. This is a concept that Toyota recently announced, which is large behavioral models. Based on the exact same underlying technology as GPT-4, what happens in these situations is a user shows the robotics one time how to do a task. In this case, teach it how to make scrambled eggs, right? The model then sits and iterates over 24 hours. It refines its understanding of the problem. They come in the next day. It's making scrambled eggs, the exact same set, right? So if you watch this video, Toyota now has almost 1,000 different processes that have been trained using large behavioral models. They each take about 1 day to train the models on. So we're building a data set of how to train these models. We're nowhere near integrating these generally, but this is where we're going. So if you take away only 3 things from this presentation this morning, I'd ask you to, 1, consider that this is not all hype. This is real. There are businesses using this today. It's affecting the world. You have to pay attention to it. 2, not only is this going fast, if you sort of look at those scaling laws and the data we have the same way I do, this is a once-in-a-generation change. There are economists out there working for the Fed and elsewhere that think we are going to see larger economic impact from this than we saw from electricity. Just put that in perspective, right? So this is changing the world in a way that is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And lastly, if you're getting in now, because it's a puppy, right? It's a baby. Now is a really good opportunity for all of us as entrepreneurs to be thinking about how we can change the world with these technologies. And with that, my name is Mike Burns, CEO of ATTAiNABLE Edge. I'll be around all morning, happy to talk with anyone who has questions. Great seeing, and we have got a couple minutes for questions, I think, Don, right?
Absolutely. First of all, Mike, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Okay, to our in-person and virtual audience, the best way that you can say thank you to our speakers is to ask them a question. We're going to do a couple so we get back on track. And does anybody in the live audience have a question? Who wants to go first?
Don up here.
Anybody?
What kind of jobs do you think will be created by AI?
Absolutely.
Would you be able to ask the question?
Yeah, so the question was, what kind of jobs will be created by AI? And the answer is a lot, right? I think software development will be different than it is today. I think the skill sets that matter the most are being able to ask the right questions and use English, being really comfortable with English so you can specify what good looks like in a way that the AI can assist with. Already we're seeing, now, I think it's too early to know, honestly, what jobs are going to be created. You'll see jobs out there for things like prompt engineer. I tend to think that's a bit of an artifact of the interfaces not being great yet and not being a long-term career, but it's hard to know exactly where it's going to go.
Mike, how about over here?
Excellent presentation. Thank you.
You want to repeat that up there?
What is the social and emotional impact that you believe AI will play moving forward?
What is the social and emotional impact that AI will play? So that's a really interesting question. And there are entire businesses being built around that today. So one of the things that I've heard, you look at it two ways. The first is this could be a potential solution for one of the biggest pandemics in our age, which is loneliness, right? So there are entire businesses being built around, in a helpful way, giving a personalized connection where people can feel safe to talk about things they might not be comfortable talking with their peers that are around them. There's actually a very large business called Character.A, which essentially lets people design companions that they can interact with. So that's the one side of it. The other side of it is, I'm very concerned on the bias perspective, right, and the AI safety. If these are not aligned with what we as a society consider to be good and true values, then they can perpetuate some of the ugliness that humans bring forward and amplify that. And so I think we have to be really careful on the AI safety front to make sure that we're preventing that.
How about one final question for you, Mike?
Sure.
This one's a bit more personal for me, but as somebody who loves coding, what do you think are the most important things to look out for and the next things that I should do to improve coding?
So the question was, as somebody who loves coding, what's the future look like for a coder and how to prepare for it? Is that a fair summary? Start now. So if you're not using generative AI-empowered coding, things like GPT-4 or Copilot, there's a lot of options. Don't wait, right? The peer-reviewed metrics are that your productivity is at least doubled. That's at the low end. And I would argue, I think Alan and I would tell you that our productivity is probably 5 times higher than it would have been otherwise. One of the tiny pieces, I'll just give you an anecdote real quick to answer your question. When I was at Benco still, like any company, there's more priorities than there is work to get it done, right? And one of the things that spurred me towards starting this company was I had a task I needed done, and the team had estimated it was going to take a few days to get it done, and it was, it wasn't the biggest priority, so we'll put it on the bottom of the pile. And I was like, I'm just going to do it myself. Haven't coded in 20 years, by the way, and got it done in 2 hours that evening with the assistance of AI-empowered generation. And I was like, oh, this is a game changer, right? Like I was not capable of doing this work on my own. I was too far removed from the hands-on. These tools have enabled me to be a better developer than I was 10 years ago when I was 10 years into being a professional developer. So, and the skill set is understanding architecture, understanding how systems work, and being able to explain it in English is the skill set you need to really perform.
Mike, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Mike Burns.